Welcome back to another episode of Freedom Finance with Lanny, guys. And today we're actually going to slow it down a little bit. I realize that there's a lot of investing, YouTube channels out there, how to invest, how to start investing, what stocks to buy, et cetera, et cetera. But I wanted to really talk about investing terminology, stock market terms to really help you, especially if you're a beginner investor, because what's good about doing all of the investing if you don't really understand some of the terms that are being used, the phrases that are being used, without having that base knowledge and making those decisions. So we're going to go through some basic stock market terms, some basic investing terms to make you a better investor, guys. So grab your favorite drink, coffee, beer, water, you name it, go grab it. Let's check it out. Let's look at all these stock market terms and let's get it. So what is the stock market? So guys, you've heard the stock market get thrown around this way or that way, and really it's an exchange where buyers and sellers, trade consideration for ownership in businesses, right? So that's the stock market. When you think of all of the exchanges across the world, there are many places to, transact in the stock market. And some of those exchanges, the two most popular exchanges that you hear, NYSE or the New York Stock Exchange. That's one of the most popular exchanges based here in the US. It's a physical exchange there in New York, just so that you're aware of one of the actual exchanges where the stock market takes place. Another popular one is NASDAQ, and that is NASDAQ, and that's a fully electronic exchange. So New York Stock Exchange is actually a physical place, and then NASDAQ is a fully electronic exchange where buyers and sellers can exchange ownership of assets. So now that you've got the stock market terminology down, right, guys? I mean, you're a beginner investor, you're an investor. Now you know what the stock market is. Again, an exchange where buyers and sellers meet to exchange assets. Typically, that is stock. So a lot of the questions are, what is a stock or what is stock? Well, stock is an ownership or an equity ownership in a business. If you start your own business and you're a one-person LLC, you're 100% owner of your business. Now, if you own stock in a company such as Apple, if you own a share of Tesla stock, if you own a share of McDonald's stock or Johnson & Johnson stock, you own, you have an ownership, you own equity of that business. You are a stock owner, you are a business owner. So that is what stock represents. So how do you own stock in a business? Well, when it comes to the stock market where buyers and sellers meet to trade possibly stock, shares is what signifies your ownership typically in the stock market. If you own one share of Apple stock or one share of McDonald's stock, you have demonstrated that you own equity in that business via owning shares of that stock. So share is very critical. You're an owner with one share or you're an owner with 1,000 shares. To give you a frame of example of how many shares can be outstanding for a company, it's really based up to that company. For instance, Apple stock currently has 15 billion shares outstanding. So it would take you a long time to own all those shares of Apple, well, especially when Warren Buffett and our friends over in Omaha at Berkshire own a ton of Apple stock. So again, a company could have issued out billions of shares of their stock, which is ownership of that business. So you can be an owner with just one share or with thousands of shares. And these days you could be an owner with partial shares. So if you had $1 and you wanted to trade on SoFi, which is where I trade, link below in the description, or on Robinhood or other brokerage websites, you can be an owner by owning partial shares of stock of a company that trades on an exchange. So we've covered the stock market. We covered what the exchanges are. We covered what a stock is. we covered what a share is. Well, what else should we dive into? Let's talk about a ticker symbol. I think you guys hear tickers being tossed around all the time. I do it myself. Oh, I bought J&J today. Oh, I bought MCD today, or KO. So those are ticker symbols, which is really an abbreviated term representing what a company is. For instance, Johnson & Johnson is J&J as their ticker symbol. Coca-Cola, surprisingly, is KO. Some other easy ones like United Parcel Services or the big brown UPS trucks, their ticker symbol is UPS. So those are the symbols that you search for on the exchange to find that company that you want to own shares in, to be an owner of that company. So remember, a ticker symbol is really an abbreviated symbol or letters that represent the company that is traded on the stock exchange. So how do you get shares of stock through the exchange? Well, you have to make a stock trade, right? So typically you're exchanging cash or a form of consideration to buy that share. Currently I invest with SoFi. Again, I set up automatic everyday trades. That link below again is in the description. I'm not forcing you to sign up, but I love it because I set it and forget it. But you could do it on many websites and brokerages: SoFi, Robinhood, Charles Schwab, Fidelity, Vanguard. I also invest on ally.com with Ally Invest. So there's many places, to buy and sell, aka stock transact, to own shares of a company. So for a transaction, you can either be a stock buyer because you're going to buy shares by exchanging cash based on the stock price, or you could be a stock seller. You could be selling shares of stock that you own to a buyer through the exchange on one of these brokerage websites. This one I have to address because when people start investing, if they're beginner investors out there, investors that are just starting out, and they're a little hesitant to do it because they feel like they're spending money when they buy a share of stock on an exchange. I don't want to buy shares of an exchange traded fund or a mutual fund. I don't want to buy shares of one of my favorite companies that I own. I don't want to spend the money. Well, you're not really spending the money. You're just transferring the type of asset. When you think of your balance sheet, cash is an asset. And then when you buy a share of stock, you're reducing your cash, but then you're adding a share of stock. So you're just changing the asset class. You still have an asset at the end of the day. It's not like when you buy a Honda Accord and you drive it off the parking lot and it's worth less. Now, stocks can trade lower, but that's typically not the goal when you are buying stocks, right? So again, you're changing the asset class. So it's going from cash to stock, still on the right side of the balance sheet, for lack of better words. You also kind of hear a lot about, oh yeah, the S&P 500 index or the Dow or, the brick. There's a lot of indexes or indices out there. S&P 500 is probably the most popular one that you hear. So it's the Standard & Poor's, again, top 500 U.S. companies that are traded. So think about that. That is really the United States top 500 largest companies. And that typically makes up one of the most popular indices out there. Again, the S&P 500. If you look at your 401k plans, if you look at other plans that are given to you, I typically look for an S&P 500 because it's going to be the lowest cost and the most basic investment, from my opinion. Now, one of my favorite ETFs, which I buy every single day, again, through the SoFi app automatically every morning, is VOO, which is Vanguard's S&P 500. And the little funny thing about VOO, which is their ticker symbol for the ETF, the V is 500. So when you actually think about how well that is represented, a little detail there that always brings a shining little spot in my eye. So that's the S&P 500 popular ETF with Vanguard, VOO, as the ticker symbol, which goes into the next terminology. I mentioned ETF or exchange traded fund. And then you probably have also heard mutual fund, guys. So again, this is for all the investors out there that are curious about what's a mutual fund, what's an exchange traded fund or ETF, or hey, maybe a beginner investor. Maybe you're curious why invest in one or the other. Well, a mutual fund is essentially a pool of assets and investors that are pulling their money together, from the high level thought about it, that usually has a higher minimum balance to start investing. The mutual fund typically is actively managed by a set of professional investment advisors, or can be passively managed. It could be tied to an index, and typically, again, minimums I've seen are anywhere from 1,000 to 3,000 to 10,000 to start in a mutual fund. And those are only traded one time every day, which is, and also they have typically higher expense ratios with the mutual fund. Now, an exchange traded fund typically is passively managed. You can buy and sell it on an exchange during the day like an ordinary stock. They typically have lower expense ratios, and you'll find far less, if any, capital gain distributions versus a mutual fund, which more than likely may have capital gains distributions to you, the shareholder. I typically, on my own individual brokerage accounts, if I have to buy between a mutual fund or an ETF or exchange traded fund, I'm buying ETFs because of the lower cost, and I can transact it during the day, plus taxes could be better. Now, within your 401ks or even sometimes an IRA, you might have a mutual fund as your only option, but typically you might be able to bypass out of those minimums simply because you're automatically doing something every single pay period or month, and that minimum might be waived if you have that in your plan or the option to do so. So that's really the difference between an ETF or a mutual fund. And hopefully that helps you when you are making that decision, whether you want to buy an ETF or a mutual fund. Have you guys had enough then for today's video on all the investing verbiage, topics, words, and phrases? Today we went over the following. The stock market. What is the stock market? What is a stock market exchange? Remember we listed out the NYSE, NYSE and the NASDAQ. What is stock? What is a share? How do I and where do I transact and buy and sell shares of stock? What is the ticker symbol of a stock? What does that mean? What is an index? Again, we talked really about the most popular one that we see, which is the S&P 500. Then we also went over what a mutual fund and what an exchange traded fund is, the differences between the two, and even which one I prefer doing in my own taxable brokerage account. We'll have another video again, but I really wanted to get this out there just because I've either gotten direct messages, I either talked to family, friends, coworkers, and they're very much unfamiliar with the stock market, and sometimes it's scary to them, or they may end up making poorer decisions just because they don't know what the terms are, the phrases, the swag and the lingo. So hopefully this video helps you as an investor out there making investment decisions. So again, guys, if you liked it, let me know in the comments. Let me know what else you want to see on this channel. Definitely subscribe and like the video. I forgot to mention that. And again, thanks for rocking with me through this one. Again, pay attention because we'll have another video coming through with another set of stock market terms and terminology, and kind of more lingo and swag that's being put out there on YouTube, investor websites and blogs. But thanks for rocking with me, guys, and I'll catch you on the next one.